Will you join me again, church, in a word of prayer? Gracious God, we give you thanks for the opportunity to come together in this place, to lift our praises, to offer our prayers, to read from your holy word, and to interpret your word. Be with us, O God. Help us, guide us, and protect us, that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts together might be acceptable in your sight. For you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Yeah, we're good. That was enough. I'm not going to get away with that one. Paul's letter to the Philippians is a fascinating study in and of itself. Paul celebrates the church at Philippi as one of the really good examples, arguably, in the whole letter of what it means to be followers of Jesus Christ. In the section we read this morning, Paul talks about the encouragement of being, I'm paraphrasing here, imitators of Christ. And in the midst of it, well, let me get the exact quote. Fortunately, I have it marked right here. He says, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness, and being found in human form." Now this is Paul, so we haven't reached the end of the sentence and won't for 3 paragraphs. But I'm going to stop there for a moment and say that I find that troubling. I find it troubling because he says to me, be like Jesus, who is just like God, who I can't be. Right? That's kind of mean. Be just like somebody you can't possibly be just like. When I was a very young man, I know what some of you are thinking, wow. Way younger. Wow. The campaign was Be Like Mike. Everybody around here should know that one. I can't be like Mike. It doesn't matter how far I let my tongue hang out of the left side of my mouth as I jump, all I do is bite my tongue. And that ball doesn't go anywhere near where I had hoped it would magically go. Now, the essence of the campaign, of course, was drink Gatorade. Right? You know, be like Mike, drink Gatorade. It'll make you great. And I joke about that a little bit because that's not all that different from the power we celebrate and remember when we drink of the cup, right? The cup makes us more like Christ. Doesn't mean I can stretch out my arms, be hung on a cross, and create forgiveness for your sin. But it does remind me to be more loving, to be more kind, to be more generous, to be more like the embodiment of care and concern that Christ offered. That's not going to throw my mind off at all. Meanwhile, back at the sermon, if I can remember where I was, is he in the frame? Okay, good. That would have been really mean to somebody watching that later. Okay. I knew it was going to happen. The problem with some of the biblical admonitions is they don't match with the modern society advice. Let me see if I can unpack this. for you. When Sarah and I moved to this community, we worked with our bank. We were pre-approved for a mortgage. Some of you have experienced that process. Not pre-qualified, pre-approved. We knew exactly what the bank was willing to lend us on our home mortgage. So what did we do? We bought the house that ran up as close as possible to that particular number, because that's what the bank told us we could afford. That's really dumb when you think about it. Just because the bank where's Sandy? Oh, there. That's really dumb, isn't it? Yeah. Margie already got it for me, but now you have to. That's really dumb. That's like walking into a furniture store, saying you need some furniture, and they say, well, we've got this great credit plan. Let's run that first. And then that salesman is trying to load every last end table and lamp they can to get to that maximum number. But it happens every day. We are in a consumerist culture that says, get everything that we say you can afford. Right? You know, let me let you in on a little secret. There's a reason MasterCard will regularly review and raise your credit limit. Because they want you to carry a bigger balance. And the ultimate irony of that is if you take out the card and read it, it says right there on the thing, this is my debit card, but it works, MasterCard. So who's in charge? The card, the bank, the company that is making money off of those expenditures. What we need to find a way to do echoes the words of Christ when he says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And find ways to live with enough. Not what I can, not what they say I can, but what is enough. And the reason I talk to you about that is because living in enough is what affords the opportunity to be generous. Larry Burkett, who was the founder of one of the Christian financial training ministries out there, not the most famous one, tells the story of his childhood. When his parent gave him $1 a week of allowance. Think far enough back, that was significant. Don't think like my child would, really. Woo! I can save up for 2 weeks and buy some candy. No, think far enough back. Many of us in the room remember when a gallon of gas was only $0.25 or less. I remember taking $0.25 in a gas can and to fill for the lawnmower, and walking to the store and being able to buy a piece of candy or gum along with that gallon of gas. And I'm younger than a lot of you. Yeah, Dick's got a look on his face right. He's like, heck, with $0.25 I could buy milk, bread, a gallon of gas, and a dozen eggs. Feed the neighborhood. I don't know that's what you're thinking about, but I'm not too far off. Meanwhile, Larry would get his $1 a week allowance. And his father gave it to him in dimes. 10 dimes every week. 10 dimes so that he could put one of those dimes in savings. So he could put one of those dimes in the church plate for his tithe. And he would say to him every week, look how many dimes you have left. Imagine if he'd done it in pennies. There would have been a lot of pennies left every week. Another of my friends tells the story of the first time he met with a financial planner. And first question the planner asked him was, I have two important questions. Here's the first one. How much do you love God? My friend's a pastor like me. He said, quite a bit. Care to monetize that? Well, I'm a tither. Okay, 10%. How much do you love? Second question. How much do you love you? Really? I know what you're all thinking right now. Oh, I want to hear it if they'd ask Rick that, because boy, we know. Let's go with about the same. Great, 10%. So we're going to form a budget based on 80% of what you see. Because if you're going to give 10% and make sure you're saving 10%, then you live on the other. That is a better formula than the credit company's formulas for living in enough. And what Paul is saying to the Philippians is to find ways to accept that you have enough to be generous, to be helpful, to care for others, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to shelter the homeless, to share the love of God with those who don't know the story. This weekend we were at Regional Assembly, and there were a number of workshops and learning opportunities, and one of those was spearheaded by our own Sue Ellen and Bill Cook as part of the committee that works on the open and affirming ministries for the region. There's probably a better name for that committee, but I don't remember what they called it, so we're going to go with that. And they were giving this workshop talking to churches about becoming open and affirming congregations. Now, you all know what that means. Most of you know the year-long journey of conversations and prayer and sometimes challenges it took to get to that point. I happened to sit in both of their sessions to tell the story from a former regional minister perspective of a church that hadn't done the exercise and had a split when suddenly they had to deal with how do we do ministry with each other in the midst of someone who was created in a way that was different from the majority in terms of sexual orientation. But what kept hitting me when I was doing the tweaks and finishes that I typically do on Saturday for Sunday was see if I can get these numbers right. 10 to 12% of the teen population, which self-identifies as LGBTIQA+, that has a 40-ish% suicide attempt rate. That's about the numbers, right? Okay. Because I didn't write it down. And I didn't go back and do research. Because I knew you'd be here. And I could just lean on you. As we think about how we respond to the blessings of God, as we as a church who says all are welcome and loved because they are perfectly created exactly the way God created them, if we know there are people that have that high a risk, I mean, I know you're not supposed to take a percentage of a percentage because it skews the numbers a little bit, but by some simple math, that means that 6 or 7 out of every 100 kids that walk by this building every day or drive by in cars or enter the high school or the junior highs around us is at high risk because someone is telling them that God says they're not lovable enough. Then we have an obligation to be generous enough to share the kind of ministry that says you are perfect just the way God created you. And that means we've got to be willing to set ourselves up to live on enough so that we can be generous enough to share that love of Jesus Christ. I don't know if you've heard this, but I'm a parent of 2 kids.
And we've heard.
Have you heard that?
Yeah, once or twice.
Once or twice you've even seen them. Pray every day. One day it'll turn. One day it will turn. Every day. Every day I marvel as I think about those 2 kids. Talk about nothing alike. And it's easy to stop at surface, right? But it goes way deeper than that. I told the first session of that learning track, it's amazing to me when I look at the statistics, because if the percent of population that is LGBTIQA+, matches, it's amazing that our family gatherings are painfully cisgender and straight, right? Because everyone is. I don't think we have, I can't think of an extended family member unless we go to 2 or 3 layers deep before we encounter anyone that isn't cisgender, so they identify with their birth gender, and traditional heterosexual orientation in my extended family.
Anybody in your family line, yes.
Yeah, that's what I said. We've got to go a layer or 2. Our gatherings are painfully plain. We've got some racial diversity, but we're painfully plain. And yet, this church is not. This church is not painfully plain. Our message is not painfully plain. What we believe deeply is not painfully plain. The question is, can we set ourselves up where we're living on enough that we can fund the kind of ministries that make that widely known? It's Stewardship Month, and I'm talking about it. I'm stepping on toes. I did a little math. You should be afraid when I do a little math. You afraid? I did a little math. If every one of us was living on $24,000 a year, and every one of us tithed, our budget would still go up a little bit. I'll let you sit with that for a second. Faithful, consistent, planned giving that starts at the beginning of the budgeting process becomes transformative for churches and their ministry. Or to put it more simply and crassly, I've never been a huge fan of it, but it's what came to my heart and mind 3 times, and I tried to erase it and I couldn't, is we give to God what's right, not what's left. We give first, and we live on enough. And when we do that, folks, as the promise that Paul called out to us echoes in our heads, we should remember that God, who created all the universe, generously blesses us with more than we can imagine. We have big dreams as a church. We have big callings as a church. It's time to be enough to be that church. Praise be to God.